जगत संसारे रूप रघुनाथ भक्त जुगा श्री जीव प्रभु लोके कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु दया करो मोरे तुम बिन के दयालु जगत संसारे आचार्य प्रभु श्रीनिवास रामचंद्र संगमगे नरोत्तम दास कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु दया करो मोरे तुम दीन के दयालु जगत संसारे श्रील प्रभुपाद की श्री चैतन्य महाप्रभु गौरपुनी महोत्सव की समवेत भक्तवृंद की श्री चैतन्य चरितमृत की गौर प्रेमानंदे। थैंक यू। जय जय श्री चैतन्य जय नित्यानंद जय द्वैत चंद्र जय गौर भक्त वृंद जय जय श्री चैतन्य जय नित्यानंद जय द्वैत चंद्र जय गौर भक्त वृंद जय जय श्री चैतन्य जय नित्यानंद जय द्वैत चंद्र जय गौर भक्त वृंद। Sri Caitanya Caritamrita, Adi-lila, chapter 8, text 11. Sannyasi buddhye more koribe namaskar. Tatapi kandibe dukkha poibe nishtha. Sannyasi buddhye more koribe namaskar. Tatapi kandibe dukkha poibe nishtha. Sannyasi buddhye more koribe namaskar. Tatapi kandibe dukkha poibe nishtha. Sannyasi buddhye by consideration of a sannyasi, more unto me, koribe, they will, namaskar, offer obeisances, tatapi, therefore, kondibe, will diminish, dukkha, distress, koibe, will get, nishtha, liberation. Translation: if a person offers obeisances to Lord Chaitanya, even due to accepting him only as an ordinary sannyasi, his material distress will diminish and he will ultimately get liberation. Please repeat. If a person offers obeisances to Lord Chaitanya, even due to accepting him only as an ordinary sannyasi, his material distresses will diminish and he will ultimately get liberation. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Krishna is so merciful that he always thinks of how to liberate the conditioned souls from the material platform. It is for this reason that Krishna incarnates, as clearly indicated in Bhagavad Gita, Yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavati bharata abhyutanam dharmasya tadatmanam srijamyaham. Whenever and wherever there is a decline in religious practice, O descendant of Bharat, and a predominant rise of irreligion, at that time I descend myself. Bhagavad Gita 4:7. Krishna always protects the living entities in many ways. He comes himself, he sends his own confidential devotees, and he leaves behind him shastras like Bhagavad Gita. Why? It is so that people may take advantage of the benediction to be liberated from the clutches of Maya. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu accepted sannyas so that even a foolish person who accepted him as an ordinary sannyasi would offer him respect, for this would help diminish his material distresses and ultimately liberate him from the material clutches. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati points out in this connection that Sri Krishna Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is the combined form of Sri Radha and Krishna. Mahaprabhu Sri Chaitanya, Radhe Krishna, Nahi Anya. Radha Krishna, Nahi Anya. Therefore, when fools considered Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to be an ordinary human being and thus treated him disrespectfully, the merciful Lord, in order to deliver these offenders, accepted sannyas so that they would offer him obeisances, accepting him as a sannyasi. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu accepted sannyas to bestow his great mercy on people in general who cannot appreciate him as Radha and Krishna themselves. Srila Prabhupada ki Oma Jnana Timidandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmiritam Jena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. I was born in the darkest ignorance, but my spiritual master has forced open my eyes with the scalpel of knowledge. I therefore offer my respectful obeisances unto him. So Srila Prabhupada would tell us time and again, Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate. Lord Chaitanya is Mahavadanya Avatar, the most merciful, because he chases after the conditioned souls to bestow love of God. Krishna says, you come here and surrender, then I'll clear you of all your sins. And Srila Prabhupada would say, Lord Chaitanya makes no such condition. He freely distributes, regardless of qualification. In some ways, the more unqualified we are, the more Lord Chaitanya takes a special interest. He comes in the Kali Yuga. He could come in the Satya Yuga, where everyone's mostly in the mode of goodness. And yet they don't get the same opportunities that Lord Chaitanya bestows upon the denizens of Kali Yuga. The most unqualified, lazy, misguided, unlucky, always disturbed. So many different attributes are there. And Lord Chaitanya even this was a stunt, in essence, is what he's saying here. His taking sannyas was purely a device so that he would be offered respect. And just by the very act of offering respect, those souls would progress in Krishna consciousness. That's how merciful Lord is, because this was a big inconvenience. He's the Supreme Personality of Godhead. We could argue the supreme enjoyer, and yet he took to a life of extreme renunciation. Broke his mother's heart, broke his wife's heart. Many of the devotees also, when they saw Lord Chaitanya's locks all shaven off, were perturbed. So Lord Chaitanya made this sacrifice because he was always thinking of ways to bring conditioned souls to Krishna consciousness. Actually, we know that Krishna consciousness begins with Shraddha. This word Shraddha is typically translated as faith. But another meaning of the word is respect. So even a fraction of a positive disposition, a fraction of appreciation, a warm feeling towards a devotee can start the conditioned soul on the homeward journey. Srila Prabhupada would sometimes say, even if they touch one book, even if they read one word, reading one word is hardly likely to bestow entire Sambandha Gyan on the conditioned soul, that they're intellectually convinced. But the fact is that even just one word read in a spirit of appreciation, oh, these people seem nice, these people seem happy and jolly, that's enough. Actually, many devotees said that when they first encountered Harinam parties, they crossed the road out of embarrassment. They were not sure they wanted to be in any way associated with devotees. And yet somehow or other, some type of appreciation must have been witnessed by Krishna, that he gave them the chance to come. Neha bhikamanasosti pratavayana vidyate swalpam apyasa dharmasya. How's the last bit? Trayato mahato bhayat. Trayate mahato bhayat. Even the fraction, olpa means little, very little. Sometimes if you're serving prasad in Bengal, they'll go olpa. This gives me a tiny amount. So even a morsel of appreciation is enough. And we should remember actually that our entire spiritual lives are founded on this spirit of appreciation. Appreciation of the Lord, gratitude we could say, appreciation of the devotees, a positive, friendly disposition, respectful disposition. I often try to remind myself, we're here because of mercy, not because we're qualified. Sometimes when people are asked to describe their coming to Krishna consciousness, they go into an elaborate, yes, I was searching for many years. Actually, we were wandering around the material universe. Brahmayan Brahmite Kon Bhagavanji, Guru Krishna Prasade Pai Bhakti Lata Bij. We might have thought we were really purposeful, but we had no idea where to look. Maybe some yearning was there, but we had no intelligence where to find Krishna consciousness. Krishna took mercy upon seeing that sincere yearning and arranged some rendezvous with the devotees. So by Krishna's mercy alone we come into contact with devotees. We can't qualify ourselves. And therefore it's really important that we maintain the spirit of appreciation of Krishna's mercy, appreciation of the wonderful association of devotees. Because if we forget, we become casual, familiarity breeds contempt, we now think ourselves qualified to pass judgment on the devotees, to decide which ones are worthy of our respect and which ones we can scorn with license. Then very quickly our spiritual life will be arrested. Again become a mouse. Puna musical bhava. This is a famous fable that Prabhupada would recite, that a mouse was feeling greatly perturbed because being harassed by a cat, went to the sadhu, please use your mystic powers and save me from the cat. And so he transformed him into a cat. And now he became a little bit more arrogant until suddenly he's being harassed by a dog. This is the nature of material solutions. As soon as we fix one thing, we create another problem. So now the dogs are all interested. So then he went back to the sadhu, took shelter, became a dog. In this way it continued until he eventually became a tiger and thought this sadhu looked like a nice breakfast. And licking his lips, he started to turn on the sadhu. I don't need you anymore, you can be my breakfast. Puna Musika Bhava, again become a mouse. So we've seen this many times. People come to Krishna consciousness, they become ecstatic for a few years, and then maybe become a little haughty, a little full of their own self-importance, particularly if that self-importance means that we engage in sadhu-ninda, criticizing devotees. In one place, in Harinam Chintamani, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur describes that even to criticize a devotee for a fault that he or she has almost given up, so it may still be there, sadhu-ninda. If Krishna judges that the mentality was not appropriate, if their mentality was one of self-importance, disrespect. It's another thing if the Guru chastises the disciple and points out a flaw for the disciple's benefit. That's a different thing. Such attendance to someone else's flaws is not a fault, not something that Krishna will take issue with. But otherwise we can put our spiritual lives in jeopardy. It's considered to be hatimata, like a maddened elephant. Sometimes you can see that an elephant, most often an elephant is quite peaceful, ambling along, but if there's something that enrages that elephant, he can wreak such havoc in a very short period of time. And it's described, if we engage in sadhu-ninda, criticizing devotees, blaspheming devotees, then it can rip up the entire garden of our spiritual life, rip up the devotional creeper, which will then dry out. So this is something we have to be extraordinarily careful. Whereas if we maintain shraddha, an attitude of respect towards the devotees, this is what leads us further on the progression. So these steps, the word krama is used by Srila Rupa Goswami in Nectar of Devotion, Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. Ado shraddha, tato sadhu sangata bhajana kriya, tato nata nivriti sat, tato nishta ruchistata. And this way he starts to lay out how it all begins, ado shraddha, with this spirit of respect typically to the devotees. Most of the time Krishna's agency of reaching out is through his representatives, the devotees. It's described here, sometimes he comes himself. But mostly, if we trace our own interest in Krishna consciousness, it was awakened by a devotee. And it may have been some kind of intellectual argument that just clicked everything into place. But mostly I would argue that shraddha is infectious. The devotee's own enthusiasm, the devotee's own sincerity, the devotee's own character prompts a deep respect inside us. And Krishna, witnessing that, thinks, this jiva has some hope. I'll encourage them a little bit. Matasmiti jnanam apohanam cha. A little remembrance will come. And if we think about the awakening of our Krishna consciousness, these words are used. Nitasiddha Krishna prena sadduka vanoy shravanadi suddha chitte kare udai. Awakening. It's like being roused from deep sleep. Sometimes it can take you a moment or two when roused from deep sleep to remember exactly what's going on. But very quickly everything comes back into memory. And Krishna consciousness is a little bit like that. It's like being reminded of some old truths that may have become dim in one's consciousness, but they come back to the fore. Oh yes, somehow I know this to be true. Matasmiti jnanam apohanam cha. Krishna's awakening out of mercy, out of grace, because he's favoring on the basis of that attitude. Srinvatam swakata Krishna punya shravana kirtana hridanta stova bhadrani vitunoti suritsatam. When Krishna sees that there's an eagerness to hear, Krishna reciprocates. Whatever understanding that jiva needs to clear all of the misgivings and the anarthas, Krishna takes care of it. Vitunoti. Vitunoti means by vibration. I gather there is an instrument that they use to clean cotton. And it's a whole bunch of strings that are there, and when they vibrate the strings, the cotton vibrates and all the garbage falls out, and just the nice cotton balls are left there. So the cleaning of our heart is a little bit similar to that. Through the vibration, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. When said in a pleasing mood, we're hearing this morning, according to the feeling, according to the sincerity, Srinvatam, Krishna is pleased with that eagerness. Eagerness to hear. Eagerness to hear also translates to openness. And this is the attitude to mix with devotees. Mixing with devotees doesn't just mean hanging out in their physical vicinity. Mixing with devotees means serving devotees, means inquiring from devotees, means open reception to learning what they have to teach. When Krishna sees again that attitude, then he actually assists. There may be data that's passing from one mind to another, like a shloka, like some argument, but it's not that Krishna consciousness is purely an intellectual handover. Sometimes we may see that someone may have limited IQ, and yet they can be fully realized in Krishna consciousness. We hear about the South Indian Brahmin. When Lord Caitanya came across him crying, everyone teasing him because he's trying to turn over the leaves with all the Bhagavad Gita verses. Why are you distressed? Well, I'm just doing what my spiritual master said and trying to read Bhagavad Gita, but I'm illiterate and they're mocking me. So their mocking is what's causing you distress? No, actually these tears are because as I'm turning the pages, even though I can't make any sense of what's being written here, Krishna appears as Parthasarathi, the driver of Arjuna's chariot. And I'm thinking how wonderful and kind Krishna is to do this for his devotee. The charioteer, with all the dust, or all the arrows, the horse manure. Krishna would do that for his devotees? Wow, how lucky are we? Lord Chaitanya said, you are the real scholar of Bhagavad Gita. And yet he wasn't able to take it in. Srila Prabhupada has labored to give us these books, painstakingly. He's taken probably impenetrable ideas and made them accessible for us. So we should absolutely apply ourselves. But it should also be understood it's not entirely an intellectual exercise. There might be times, even when we'll read a purport, and we won't necessarily make 100% sense. What is Srila Prabhupada saying here? Sometimes it still remains confusing. But if we are sincere in our desire to learn, Krishna will prompt revelation. Tesham evana kampatam ahama jnana jantamaya nashayam yatma bhavasto jnana dipena bhashvatam. Dwelling within the heart with the shining lamp of knowledge, I destroy the ignorance. So we should always understand that our moving from Shraddha to Sadhusanga to Bhajana Kriya, while the word steps are used, it's not like these 7 steps we saw the other day where you take one step in a positive direction and you leave behind the other place as you make your next step and subsequent steps. It's steps more like a staircase, where Shraddha is the foundational step upon which all the other steps are built, and it's consolidated. So to the extent that we have deep appreciation for Vaishnavas, we'll mix with them, we'll take instruction from them, and we'll apply Krishna consciousness according to their guidance. Bhajana Kriya means to follow the instructions of the spiritual master, to engage in sadhana bhakti, to follow the rules and the directions for one's engagement according to the direction of sadhus. And this in turn leads to anartha nivriti. It's not that we give up Bhajana Kriya and move on to anartha nivriti, but the prosecution of devotional service in the association of devotees with a deep spirit of appreciation cumulatively leads to anartha nivriti, the clearing of anarthas. And proportionately as those anarthas are cleared, nishtha, our faith becomes steady. Srila Prabhupada would talk about unflinching faith. To flinch means to draw back. You know, someone is looking like they're going to slap us, we flinch. Srila Prabhupada would describe unflinching. Shraddha Shabde Vishwas Kohe Sudada Nishchai Krishna Bhakti Koidisava Kama Krita Hoy. What is faith? Faith means that deep conviction that all I need to do is please Krishna, render service to Krishna. And if I take care of that, all other duties, all other obligations, all other interests, all other needs, all other considerations automatically taken care of, automatically resolved. I don't need to separately endeavor. Vyavasayatmika buddhi ekeha kurudandana bahustyakya hinantascha buddhayo vyavasayana. If we think about why Krishna was stressing this to Arjuna, Arjuna, you're stressing about the grandfather and respectful obeisances and what's going to happen to the women and what's going to happen to the kingdom, and just take care of what I'm asking you to take care of. Focus on that one thing in a fixed way. All other considerations are taken care of. Otherwise, in the absence of that fixation on the orders of the spiritual master, on the orders of Krishna, bahusakya hyanantascha. There's so many unlimited paths you could take. In the same way we sing every day, Guru Mukha Padma Vakya Chitete Koriya Aikya Ana Koriho Mani Aj. Make the words coming from the lotus mouth of the spiritual master one with your heart, or one with your consciousness. Chitete Koriya Aikya. It's the same essential meaning as Vyavasaya and Mikabuti. Ana Koriho Mani Aj. And don't desire anything else. Don't have any other agenda. Just the spiritual master's service. And if we prosecute Krishna consciousness in that spirit, Srila Prabhupada would say this is the secret of success. When he read Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's commentary on this verse, it said that the disciple doesn't have to worry about so many things. Just what is it my spiritual master has asked of me, or expects of me, or has instructed me? Let me make that my life purpose. And by always meditating on how to fulfill this purpose, one achieves all perfection. Krishna gives all assistance to that sincere devotee. Let me just see if there's also other points here. So our entire conduct should be in that spirit of awakening other and sustaining others' faith, including vigilantly guarding our own faith and our own spirit of appreciation of devotees. We should always conduct ourselves in such a way as to help awaken other people's appreciation of Krishna consciousness. Again, that doesn't mean that we start twisting the philosophy to try and make it more pleasing. That would actually suggest a level of faithlessness, that we've got no conviction that Krishna's power will work, and that we think it's about our intellectual smarts, that we will make these adjustments. Oh, I can see certain ideas are a little less pleasing to people. Let me not disturb them. Let me screen this part of Krishna consciousness from them, or whatever. So this is a little unfortunate. When Srila Prabhupada was registering ISKCON, and it mentions the 4 prohibitions, and Stephen Goldsmith, the lawyer, he was thinking, Srila Prabhupada, maybe you could back it off a little and not be so strident in your pointing out at the 4 prohibitions in this document. We will not change Krishna consciousness to suit the Americans. Srila Prabhupada roared back. And it's actually not about coming up with a cunning strategy. That's not to say that we shouldn't strategize, but we should understand that Shraddha is infectious. If we're enthusiastic about our practice of Krishna consciousness, if we're convinced of the futility of material existence, then that will come through quite powerfully. The agency of Krishna will help to awaken in that other person. If we're preaching as an intellectual exercise, like, I think I'm supposed to do this, or even, this is a high status activity, I'll get lots of kudos if I become a preacher. But we're not ourselves completely convinced of the futility of material existence, then it's unlikely that our words will awaken others' faith. But if we have a deep taste ourselves for Krishna consciousness and a disinterest, an appetite only to please the Guru and Krishna, then that becomes a very infectious strain of Krishna consciousness. Viral. Krishna consciousness will go viral. And will be to infect many souls. We know that Srila Prabhupada made this reference when he was on Jaladuta, waiting at Boston Harbour. I think there was a delay of about a day or something. Srila Prabhupada was just looking out at America, staying on the boat, waiting for disembarkation and everything. And Srila Prabhupada wrote this poem, just starting to take in the darkness of America, like he makes it, most of the population is covered here by the modes of Tamagun and Rajagun. How will it be possible that I reach them? And in his last verse of this poem, he says, Bhakti nai bhed nai. I don't have any bhakti, nor do I have any Veda. And yet I have this big name, Bhakti Vedanta. I've got this really, lot of expectation on this name, he was indicating. He says, but I do have full faith. And if you like Krishna, you can reveal the real purport of Bhaktivedanta. Very cryptic, just a little exchange he's having with Krishna, indicating that faith was everything. And he would tell us that. I just gave whatever my spiritual master said without change. And he would berate himself sometimes. 30, 40 years passed from getting that first instruction from Srila Bhaktisiddhanta. And I couldn't do it, but I was always meditating on how I would be able to do it. There was a devotee that, trying to remember his name, Bhagwat Maharaj met in 1970. He went on a street in Calcutta, and they were trying to converse, but Bhagwat Maharaj at that time knew no Bengali, and that Bengali gentleman knew no English, so they were just sort of bouncing back and forth, maybe with a few broken words. Bhagwat Maharaj got out back to Godhead. And that devotee, he was a disciple, I think, of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, saw Srila Prabhupada's photograph. Oh, Abhay Babu took sannyas. He was oblivious to that. He probably hadn't come into contact with Srila Prabhupada for 20, 30 years. And then later, when they went to, they were together and someone was able to translate for them, he said, yes, I remember a conversation at Sitakanta Banerjee Lane. Prabhupada used to have a house and maybe his business, like a laboratory there, Sitakanta Banerjee Lane, and he used to let some of the rooms to his godbrothers so they could preach in Calcutta. And this devotee, whose name I can't remember, he was saying he came across a very animated argument one evening when they were reading Caitanya Caritamrita together, or Chaitanya Bhagavat, and discussing the meaning of this. In every town and village my holy name will be preached. Piti viti achayata nagaradigram sarvachapachar hoibe monam. So this prediction, Lord Chaitanya says, in every town and village my holy name will be preached. And they were arguing as to whether this should be taken literally or whether this was a type of poetry, a type of, hyperbole, that someone was saying, yes, Krishna consciousness will go wide. And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur had taken Krishna consciousness right across India, 60 centers across India. And this was as much as many people could ever imagine. But we know Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur had vision overseas. And he even sent disciples. Bon Maharaj and others were sent to Germany, to England. But at that time they weren't able to have much success. Maybe one or two interested parties, but for the amount it was costing Gaudiya Mission to fund their overseas expedition, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur called it off at that time. So in this argument, he remembers that Srila Prabhupada was very fierce, that this was actually going to happen. And he got so animated that he walked off in quite a fierce mood. And as he's going down the stairs, he said, "Some fool will do it." And then he popped his head back up. "Not you." And they kept going. And we know that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur marked him noticed how eager to hear Srila Prabhupada. At Kumbh Mela, when he was speaking, people would stay a little while, but then they would be, distracted and leave. And he noticed that his disciple Abhayacharya Aravinda Das was staying throughout, attentively listening, focused listening. There were times when Srila Prabhupada's godbrothers would discuss with Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, this Abhay is a nice person, he helps us out in our mission in Prayag and other places, but surely he should just give up and join the mutt full time. I mean, he's got such potential. If he would just give his full energies, leave him alone. In time he will do everything. Everything. And we see that. And Srila Prabhupada attributed it all to his faith. I simply had faith in what my spiritual master, I simply repeated what my spiritual master said. So this is the invitation Srila Prabhupada has invited all of us. We may have very limited realizations at this time, but to assist Srila Prabhupada, Jari Dekha Tari Kaha Krishna Upadesh Amar Agai Guru Hoya Tada Eidesh. Whatever little bit you've understood, that you pass on. Srila Prabhupada will say, this is preaching. And it's amazing, actually, if you think about, if Srila Prabhupada had himself to go out and convince every jiva who has taken up Krishna consciousness over the last 50 years, I don't know how big Krishna consciousness would be, but somehow he activated everybody, even people with limited understanding. But he infected us all with this spirit of, viral spirit of Krishna consciousness. And it's still spreading virally. People are somehow coming into contact with Krishna consciousness and still being electrified with the spirit that Srila Prabhupada has infused into everybody. So this is our opportunity, somehow to conduct ourselves through our practice, through our lively engagement. Srila Prabhupada would say, and I believe this comes from Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, he who has life can preach. So if we're engaged in Krishna consciousness in a way that we become enlivened, that enlivenment is what will rub off on others. Even they may understand, they may not understand. So somehow we owe it to to make our own life successful and then strive to introduce Krishna consciousness to others. Thank you very much, Srila Prabhupada Ki. There's some chance for other questions or comments. Prabhu.
This question.
You're the channel for the remote questions.
Question. Please Krishna, everything is taken care of. Conversely, if one is unhappy, does it indicate one's failure to properly apply the above principle? Can you repeat that?
Yeah. If just by pleasing Krishna everything is taken care of, does it follow that if we're in a morose condition, that there's something in our consciousness which isn't quite on? I would say yes. Raja Vijay Raja Kuyam Pavitra Vitavutamam Pratyakshavadamam Dhamyam Susukam Kartamabhayam. Krishna consciousness is joyfully performed. Of course, there are times when we might take anxiety on our own. We try and organize something for Krishna consciousness. We might put ourselves into some form of transcendental anxiety. But transcendental anxiety would also be a type of blissful engagement. There would be something that would be still infectious, so we wouldn't want to continue that activity, even though there could be some external sense of being stressed out. There is also lamentation, like the gopis when separated from Krishna. They would appear to be distressed, but that would also be a form of bliss. But most of the time in the material world, if we're hankering for something, if we're lamenting about something, then we're not on the Brahmabhuta platform. Our soul is not feeling happy. It means actually something isn't quite connecting. What is that verse? Peace formula? Bhaktaram jagatapasam sarvalokamaheswaram suridam sarvabhutanam gyātyam māṁ shantim pritchati. If we know these things, that Krishna is the controller, he's the owner, the rightful enjoyer, and he's our friend, then there's actually nothing that would really should trouble us in any way. So if we're troubled, it means that we've forgotten Krishna is in charge, or that he's our best friend, or we think some material condition needs to be adjusted to make us happy. The problem with adjusting material conditions, Prahlad Maharaj described like scratching an itch. There might be a moment of relief while one scratches the itch, and then the itching returns even more fiercely. This is the challenge when we're trying to make adjustments in the world. If I have this situation, this situation, this situation, then I'll be happy. Hankering and lamenting. Clear sign that we've dropped off the transcendental platform. Are you checking that he's happy? In the meantime, does anyone else have comments or questions? Maharaj, do you have any?
Well, just I always remember the incident when Prabhupada was in Africa, and there was one servant travelling with him, and he was always morose. And Prabhupada one time said, "Why I have to look at your morose face?" Always remember that. You should be happy in Krishna consciousness.
Srila Prabhupada, I think, even indicated that if a devotee is in nice consciousness, they will be attractive, they'll be pleasing. That may or may not correspond to worldly ideas of beauty, like, symmetrical features and so on. But there'll be something extraordinarily uplifting about looking at that person's face, and conversely, if there's something not quite right, that face will be a little distressing.
So thank you so much for the ecstatic class, Prabhu. It was wonderful. I was admiring how many slokas you know.
So many are forgotten.
Just speaking to the point about the happiness and the moroseness, it's sometimes a really fine line, isn't it? Because we're jubilant in having the opportunity to serve Prabhupada and to serve Krishna, but at the same time you can feel really morose that you're falling so short of what you feel that you should be, and after all we're struggling with the three modes, we're struggling with, for some of us, our aging bodies, and we're going the prospect of, how will we be heroes at the time of death, or will we be fearful? All of these things sometimes play your mind, and you can feel, I have so many bad qualities, I commit Vaishnava Ninda, how can I, uplift myself, but at the same time joyful because at least you've got contact with Prabhupada and Krishna. So I think sometimes that, in a way, that sense of failure or sense of gloom is not always a bad thing if it can motivate us to, try harder. That's just one thing I wanted to mention. And we're talking about hearing. I recently heard a wonderful lecture from Lokanath Maharaj through the Books of the Basis Initiative, and he was talking about Shravanam, hearing. And we're always hearing about the Lord, hearing about the pastimes of the Lord. But we want to hear from, who are we hearing this from? We're hearing it from the words of the pure devotees through the Prabhupada. And then he was pointing out that when we read and study Prabhupada's books, we are hearing through the Prabhupada. And it's so important that we do read and study Prabhupada's books on a daily basis, because that's what he wanted. And you know, when I talk to devotees, I realise that that's not happening, they're not doing it. And it's, you know, it's not easy every day to make sure that you fit, you know, even half an hour into reading, but once you develop that taste, then it's like, this is my reading time now. Or, no, I didn't read today, I've got to make sure that, you know, I do it tomorrow. So I think when that real commitment to reading Prabhupada's books and you're hearing from Srila Prabhupada directly, these are his ecstasies, this is a way to really get to know Srila Prabhupada. And as you read more and more, all these wonderful subtleties and nuances of Srila Prabhupada's personality really come through. And you know, the things that I've read, you know, things before, and then I'm rereading and I go, I don't know how I missed that. That's such an incredible revelation of who Srila Prabhupada is. So, I encourage devotees to hear from Srila Prabhupada, but you're not only listening to his lectures and these, you know, this kind of hearing his powerful voice, but his voice is heard also in reading and studying books.
Definitely a great way to ensure that one gets reinfected on a daily basis by Srila Prabhupada on Bhakti, Krishna consciousness. In regards to optimism and pessimism, Srila Prabhupada chose a really interesting verse from Caitanya Caritamrita as his masthead for Back to Godhead. Krishna Surya Sama Maya Haya Andhakar Jaham Krishna Tahan Nahi Mayad Adhikar. Godhead is light, nescience is darkness. Wherever the sunlight of Krishna consciousness is, nescience can't remain, or along those lines. So I know myself, that's my chief barometer. If I'm seeing clouds everywhere, gloomy shadows and darkness, and I'm seeing devotees' faults and the movement's faults and so on, to me that means I'm in the gloom underneath the cloud somewhere. I need to get out into the sun of Krishna consciousness, which is full of hope. So no matter how pessimistic the material world is, and all those things, you know, the faults of the society, the faults of its leaders, the faults of all the prabhus, they're probably all genuinely there. But if I'm being brought down and going into a gloom because of those things, it means I'm missing the sunlight. And there's something about my consciousness which needs to somehow get back into the sunny pastures of Krishna consciousness. Because then I can still see those faults, and I have hope. I see lots of reasons to still be cheerful. I see, yes, this prabhu may still, you know, have this anartha or whatever it may is, but look at all the wonderful qualities that they have. And that appreciation then far outshines and outperforms the gloom. And sometimes we see, I probably spent several decades actually in a gloomy funk, where, you know, I looked at the movement, it was a cause of disappointment and disillusionment and this and that. And actually, if we're in Krishna consciousness, or even if we're just in sunny consciousness, that we're moving towards the sun, we'll actually feel every day to be full of hope and optimism, and we'll realize how Prabhupada's still present and Krishna is working through his devotees. Srila Prabhupada often talk about one good eye and one bad eye. So it's not that we're Pollyanna, rose-colored glasses, we can't see the things that need attention and things that are to be done. But if we're becoming overwhelmed with criticism, overwhelmed with gloom and despair, these are sure signs that our consciousness is just not sunny anymore.
But what about when you're not casting your eyes at anyone else? What about when you're not casting your eyes at anyone else? As you were talking about faults in the person, the devotee, or faults in the movement or whatever. But what about when you're casting that eye at yourself? So how do you do you say, okay, well, I'm falling short in this way, or I could improve in so many ways, but hang on a second, you are doing this and you are doing that, and, so it's really hard because you don't want to self-aggrandize or think yourself, achieving something in Krishna consciousness or in care for devotees, but at the same time you're self-analytical and understand, I'm falling so short of the mark of developing, sincerity and purity and all of those things in the mind. It can be discouraging.
I believe it was Nanda Kumar that Srila Prabhupada said, all of the rules, all of the standards, all of the high principles, they're to be applied to yourself, not used as a lens to judge others. And this is neophyte mentality, actually. The neophyte mentality is to compare constantly. How am I doing compared to others? Am I the best devotee? I think I'm the best devotee. There's just me, there's Krishna, and then there's all these other rabble. The Madhyamadikari starts to distinguish that these are the people I need to take shelter of. Here are some people I may be able to benefit in some ways. These people I should befriend. That distinction is the sign of progress in Krishna consciousness. If we're full of comparison and thinking I'm the best devotee around here, Kanishta.
I'm not even talking about that. I'm not talking about any comparison with anyone else. I'm talking about the inner self-reflection that is acting right. So sometimes when we look at ourselves, not comparing ourselves to anyone else, but just looking within ourselves and realizing that, like you pointed out before, we've been wandering in this, phantasmagoria of so many births. I guess the way to be optimistic is that we have, through the Prabhupada, we hold on to the Prabhupada's devotee and he will take us back. And I guess relying on the mercy of Krishna, even though I'm kind of answering my question, realising that we're so on our own volition, on our own Shakti or whatever, it doesn't exist. We're only relying on the mercy of the people on the previous year.
I think,
just a few points.
Yeah, I think in Nectar of Devotion, where the 6 divisions of surrender are mentioned, the idea to be confident that Krishna will come through for one is one of the essential elements of surrender. I'm mindful that I've gone over time drastically. I apologize. Srila Prabhupada ki.